Okay, it looks like we are officially live. Hello, everybody. Joshua Hatton here with ImpEx Beverages, and this is the third of five distillery deep dives we're doing for 2021. Hopefully, you were able to join us for the first two, the first one being focus on our single malt Scotch whiskey brands, and then the second one being on our non-whiskey brands, or gins and rums and such. And today, or tonight, and for some, tomorrow morning, we're focusing on world whiskey and the world whiskey brands within the ImpEx portfolio. And so I wanted to bring in our guests. Of course, as always, we've got the good Sam Filmus and Chris Uhde of ImpEx. Gents, how are you both?
Good afternoon.
Hello, Joshua. Hello, everyone.
Good afternoon, good evening, and good night. And then let's bring on Laura Davies and Giancarlo Bianchi from Penderyn. How are you both?
Doing well, thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Yeah, very well, thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. Did I pronounce your last name correctly, Giancarlo?
Yeah, you said Bianchi, you did.
Then I didn't pronounce it right, Bianchi. Okay, I'll get it right next time. And then let's go a little further. So now here we are in Wales. We'll go a little further to Tel Aviv, Israel, with Tal from M&H Distillery. How are you this morning?
What time is it? I'm not sure. Talk to me in a few cups of coffee, and then we'll talk. We'll see. I'll see what's up with me.
Okay, perfect. And then finally, we've got Katie and Aaron, and we had Bobby. Let's see if he comes back in. Looks like we may have lost him, but we've got Katie and Aaron from the Cask Chasers. How are you both doing?
I'm doing good too. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on. There he is.
Sorry about that.
How are you? No worries. How are you?
Technology. Good, man. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, happy to have you. So as I was telling our viewers here, and obviously you all know, today what's in discussion, or what we're focusing on, is world whiskey, and that brings me to my opening question, which is, here in the U.S., throughout the world, if you go into a liquor store, invariably you'll see a Scotch whiskey section and you'll see a bourbon section. And if it's a slightly bigger store with a bit more of a focus on whiskey, maybe they'll include an Irish whiskey section. And then if you have an even bigger store that focuses a bit more on whiskeys, then they have this category that's called world whiskey, which seemingly is a good moniker for this category because it takes whiskeys from all over the world, puts you into one category. And I would think on one side, you can all work together to try to push, here we are, Penderyn, we are world single malt. Or Tal, you can say, here we are, we're milk and honey from Israel, we are world single malt. And I think, in fact, you guys work together in distribution, so there are some synergies there. So I wondered, in thinking of the category world whiskey, do you think that term does what you do enough justice? Or do you think it should be broken out a bit more to highlight heritage or highlight what your country can do from a flavor creation standpoint of whiskey? So you all know, I fed you that question last night, so I gave you time to ponder it. And so hopefully you've had time to ponder it. And I'm going to be kind. Tal is still waking up. So I'm going to let him drink a little coffee. If you don't mind, I'd like to throw it over to Laura and Giancarlo from Penderyn, as I have a little Penderyn legend. What are your thoughts there?
Jan, do you want to go ahead, or do you want me to go ahead?
Oh, Giancarlo, you are muted.
That was my signal for Laura to go ahead.
Okay. Okay. I think my initial thoughts on this are that it's great to have a world whiskey category, and it's certainly great for us to be alongside some really great whiskey brands in this category. And let's be honest, you can't have a Welsh whiskey category. It'd be very, very small. And if you went to the extent of splitting each category into each country, it would just become lost on the consumer and get very confusing. But I think sometimes you also become lost if you're lumped in together a lot of brands. You know, if you're putting Welsh whiskey against Australian whiskey, you know, against whiskies from all over the world, sometimes there's not enough to link them. So I think that's where maybe the retailers and the brands themselves have to really work quite hard to show what links them, to show what makes them similar, what makes them different. And then I think maybe the time will come, maybe in a few years, where the category can perhaps be split up a little bit more, as there are more brands in each country, as the brands develop and become more widely known and they grow. Maybe that's the time to split it a little bit more. Maybe Jan will have something to add on that.
Yeah.
No, I think I agree. I think with everything you said, Laura. And I think the category world whiskey, I think it's essential. It has been essential and will be essential for some time to come. And it depends where you are in the world, at what stage the emancipation of the whiskey category is. And I think, generally speaking, it means anything that doesn't come from a traditional region, producing regional whiskey. So anything that is not, I won't list them all, but Scotch, Irish, bourbon, Canadian, Japanese. And in that sense, it's a very useful tool, especially where the awareness of whiskey from non-traditional regions is a bit lacking, if you want. I can think of places like Russia, for example, or Italy in some places where really it's a very traditional kind of market for Scotch whiskies, for example. So there is certainly a role for world whiskey, and and also I think the category what also means is that it's a new way of making whiskies, more innovative. Part of the reason for that is natural. It's the environment, the maturation environment, as demonstrated by what M&H is doing in Israel. And the other part could be the materials used, the technology employed, which is a bit less traditional than what people are used to. So yeah, any store that will have a world whiskey shelf or maybe a whole unit, obviously that's a very emancipated kind of store, and it's very welcome for whiskies of the world, like the ones we got on tonight's call. So I don't know if I answer your question there. Those are my thoughts on the category as a whole.
Yeah, no, I think that's great insight. And as you were getting closer towards the close, and you were talking about just being separated from the more traditional categories of of bourbon and Scotch and Irish and etc. A thought that hit me was the moniker world whiskey could be a great way to escape people saying, I like that Welsh Scotch, I like that Japanese Scotch, right? And so on. And if you use this term, that world whiskey umbrella, that could be the thing that cuts the umbilicus from Scotch.
I guess I also agree with Laura's comment, though, that in due course, as this journey continues in various parts of the world towards the establishment of the category, bit by bit, it will need to become a little bit fragmented, possibly, and diversified into its sub-regions, if you want. I guess, for example, in Wales at the moment, we got 2 distilleries operating. No, it's actually more, 4 actually, producing at different kind of levels. We got a new one opening in the next couple of weeks, and then we'll open another one in another next year, I think. So the region is kind of establishing itself. So at some point we might want to have the Welsh whiskey region in its own right. But obviously, that's something that will take time and patience. And in the meantime, I think we are going to stick to the world whiskey category as an educational tool if you want to inform the consumer that we're not in a traditional producing region.
Yeah. What about you, Tal? What are your thoughts on that?
I totally agree with the guys. I think, as Gianni said, it's not only the location; it's something we add. If it's the environment, like Gianni said, like our climate or Penderyn way of stills of distilling, which is different. It's thinking outside the box. So I love the category, but from my end, I think if we add the new world whiskey, it's going to be even better, because we're doing new stuff. We're doing a little bit of different stuff, and I like world whiskies, but I think the category should be called the new world whiskies.
I think that's an excellent point, and it makes me think. And Sam, maybe you can touch on this a little bit, but it makes me think of Gouden Carolus, where they have a different approach to whiskey making, where they're using their own beer mash bill, obviously an unhopped version of that, and focusing more on the fermentation side, a bit more on the fermentation side, to then make their whiskey a new world whiskey style.
Sure, Joshua. Let's go back to that shot that you started as an example. We have the Scotch category, we have bourbon category, we have Irish whiskey, and then we have a category that you just can't call it good tasting whiskey or great whiskeys. You have to categorize it somehow, right? So let's call it world whiskey, or as Tal suggested, new world whiskey. The United States is a multicultural, multinationality country, and people come here, and what the importers bring from their own countries, it's a little bit nostalgic, but it brings them back to good memories of their youth years and of their childhood, and etc. So what I like about having more and more whiskey available from different countries is everyone is coming with their own signature, with their own style. Penderyn is not trying to copy Irish whiskey or Scotch whiskey. Same with M&H, same with Gouden Carolus, that have totally different style. And basically, they bring their cultures here in some way, what this country can offer as the best of the best. So I think it's we can call it New World Whiskey. I completely agree with you, Tal, but it's a great category that is booming now, really, really on a serious level.
And thinking of booming whiskeys, I think if we expanded that initial set of shops that I talked about before, where you have a shop that has Scotch and bourbon, then Scotch bourbon, then Irish, then Scotch bourbon and world whiskey, you may have some that might even have their own Japanese whiskey section, because there are so many Japanese whiskeys and it's become so big. And Chris, as you being the Japanese whiskey guru, or at least the person that I think of who knows more than anyone else I know about Japanese whiskey, do you think it's good for Japanese whiskey as a category to be separated by itself, or do you think it has a better home within the world whiskey category?
I think the category is still trying to figure out what it is within itself, to be honest, because it's so varied, right? Like the laws of Japanese whiskey are pretty wide as far as what it will allow in. So it's the way that I think of all of it, like holistically, like the umbrella of what we're all kind of going through, is I kind of think back to when I was going into bars and drinking beer mostly, and the evolution of craft beer in the United States and how it placed itself in the shelf, right? You used to have you would just have beer, and then you would have like foreign beer, and then it became beer, Belgian beer, and English beer. Then it became like beers based on category, and then it became beers based on sub-region of categories. So it used to be like an IPA section, then it became a West Coast IPA section. And slowly they kind of figured it out over, 15, 20 years is how it was going to be. And I think that we're going to see the same thing with whiskeys. Like as the Welsh whiskey category develops, where it falls in juxtaposition with everything else, it's going to depend on real estate within stores, and it's going to depend on which way it sways. And Japanese whiskey will be the same. I wouldn't be surprised if all of a sudden we had a few stores come out and they did it based on grain profile, right? Like if they just had corn whiskeys and malt whiskeys and so on and so forth. Like it wouldn't surprise me one bit.
Huh.
So who knows?
Yeah. Oh wow, this a completely different perspective, which I wouldn't expect any less from you, sir. Katie, Aaron, and Bobby, I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this because I think, you know, like me, you're coming to it from a consumer standpoint as well, right? You're going in and you're talking to the retailers who are trying to talk to you about whiskey. So I wonder what your thoughts might be from a consumer perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I can start if you guys are good with it. Everything that everyone said so far makes a lot of sense to me as far as, you know, we really want to wait and let each category kind of mature a little bit before it breaks out. So that way it makes a little bit more sense. Joshua, as you said, I really like thinking about things from not just the standpoint of the consumer, but especially people that are newer to whiskey, right? Because that's one of the joys that we have on the podcast. And one of the things we focus on, it's how to share this with more people, including the ones that are just kind of getting into it. So I think the point that I'd be really excited about is how can you strike a balance between, I guess, not underselling a specific region because maybe there are only a few distilleries in that region, but also still highlighting, hey, this is one of the forefront countries that are developing New World whiskeys. Thinking about it in terms of wine almost, you know, if I know very little about red wine, I just know that there are good French wines, there are good wines out of Napa Valley, and I walk into a liquor store and I see a red wine from Missouri, US, you know, without knowing anything about that region, I could easily kind of write that off as maybe something I'm not interested in. So I think the more creative the different liquor stores can get and distributor partners can be in highlighting who those front runners are as everyone kind of emerges, that's really going to set everybody in that category apart.
Wow. That was a fantastic insight. That's awesome. Thank you. Nailed it.
How do you follow that?
You don't. You drop your mic, Katie, and that's it.
These guys can.
I'll chime in. I actually was on the same page mentally as Chris. I remember years and years ago, when craft beer kind of made its boom, walking into this big store, and at the time I was drinking, you know, what everybody drinks, but then it was these categories of beers from different areas of the world, and I thought, well, okay, German beer, obviously, Irish beer makes sense, but Ukrainian beer, and I was in it. I wanted to be a part of it. I wanted to experience it, you know. Now, as we people ask us what should we drink, or, you know, give me some ideas. We try to throw them as whiskey enthusiasts. We try to toss them to the direction of something unique and different. A lot of times, when I go to a liquor store, I know my Scotch section, I know my bourbon. If they're really, you know, big, they may even separate bourbon rye, maybe bourbon rye, American single malt. But then it's just this one little shelf where you have a few select, you know, bottles of Japanese whiskey, maybe your Welsh whiskey, maybe an Australian whiskey if you're lucky. It would be amazing to see a world whiskey area. And then as those companies or those facilities grow, they kind of get their own shelf. Because I kind of do see Japanese whiskey becoming its own shelf, its own section sooner than later. I mean, there's enough of it once they get who they are and what they are together, once they grow up a little bit. But I think it'd be great. I think it would be compelling to step away from the usual and to dip into something unique and different. And they all are different. And that's the other side of it. You got to sell these things as different. Welsh whiskey is Welsh whiskey. It tastes like Welsh whiskey. It's its own thing. It's not Scotch whiskey. It's Welsh whiskey. You also need your people at the store pushing that, which they're out there doing if they're whiskey fans anyway. Yeah. That's not as cool as what Katie said, but that's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it.
You know what? A for effort. Bobby. No, that was really wonderful. Appreciate that. Aaron, what are your thoughts on this?
So yeah, I was kind of going down the same path everybody else was thinking, and then Chris said the thing about whiskeys maybe being separated by their profile, and these are corn whiskeys, and like that kind of blew my mind. And like honestly, I wonder if not that this is ever going to happen, but I wonder if that'd be almost a better way to educate a consumer, because you are going to get similar profiles from single malts that you're not going to get from whiskeys that start from a corn mash. So what we see a lot is when we do the podcast, we'll get like listener questions sometimes, and a lot of times it's really just my biggest concern is, how do you educate the consumer? How do you get them to understand what stuff? And you're going to have people that it's I drink bourbon, or I drink this one brand, and those people are those people. I think the world whiskey, or the new world whiskey category, multiple categories, is really going to be more for the whiskey enthusiast than just somebody that I'm going to go get whiskey. Bobby says this all the time. We'll hear people say, I don't really like whiskey, but I like bourbon, and it's so like there's that disconnect where folks don't know one thing from the other really, and it's all baby steps, and that's part of what we try to do with our group. The podcast is sort of connect people that know, people like all of you guys, with people that have no clue, that are like scared to ask questions, and I just wonder what's the best way to educate the consumer. I don't think we're going to answer that tonight. That'd be awesome if we did, but yeah, I have
all night.
Yeah, okay, good.
I have all night.
All right. I've got some single malts with me, so we'll see how far we can go down this rabbit hole. But yeah, I just really like that idea, Chris. If you can get that out to everybody in the world and every liquor store, let's just start separating them by mash bill and yeah.
Well,
yeah, exactly.
I would also follow that up by saying I'm also for world peace, but what do I know?
Let's figure that out tonight too. World peace and how to educate the consumer. No big deal.
Just thinking about this and like you. Geez, now I'm forgetting. I'm only one dram in. I'm already forgetting. But I think it may have been you, Aaron, that said, Welsh whiskey is Welsh whiskey. It tastes like Welsh whiskey. But it was Bobby. Okay, it was Bobby. I messed up. It was the one cool. Damn, it was the one cool thing he said, and I attributed.
How dare you?
To someone else. But when I think about Welsh whiskey, and Bobby, you bring up a really good point. When we think of Welsh whiskey, there's only one distillery to think of, and of course that's Penderyn. I know that there are other distilleries in Wales that are making whiskey. There's spirit being matured to then become whiskey, but no one else has whiskey other than Penderyn. However, the reason why we say Welsh whiskey tastes like Welsh whiskey, I think in large part, and Laura, you're the head distiller there, so please correct me if I'm wrong. But I think Welsh whiskey, as we know it, tastes like it does because of the Faraday stills that you're using. And so if you agree with that statement, what do you think might become that overarching Welsh style of whiskey? Or is that attainable?
So I think Welsh whiskey is what Bobby would recognise as Welsh whiskey at the moment as Penderyn, because we are the the forerunners of it. We are, to be fair, across the world, we are what people know as Welsh whiskey. But we have the Penderyn stills, the Faraday stills, and so that gives us a very unique, very light, fruity, flavourful kind of spirit that is very distinct and very recognisable. However, other distilleries in Wales won't have the Faraday stills. And so perhaps when some of these new distilleries come on board, and the product that they're maturing now becomes available for bottling and for sale, that won't necessarily have the same sort of character because it won't have been produced on the same stills as we've got. So it may be that, you know, that what Bobby sees as Welsh whiskey at the moment, maybe that definition that flavour definition will change over time. But I think what's really important is that as Welsh producers, or as a group of producers in any country, you have the common aim of making the best quality spirit that you can. And perhaps you agree a definition that you will, you know, as there is in Scotland, that perhaps you will use a certain mash bill or whatever. But I think that has to be agreed by producers. But I think going forward, maybe as more distilleries in Wales come on board, perhaps the flavour profile of Welsh whiskey will differ slightly.
Yeah. Do you know, you're also producing whiskey in more traditional, you know, lantern-shaped copper pot stills. Do you see yourselves eventually adjusting your flavor profile as a mixture of spirit from those two still types, or do you see yourselves sort of keeping those separating the milk from meat, if you will?
I think this is probably a question for Jan, because he's got a lot more insight into the future plans. But I think just before he chips in there, I think my point would be that we are part of the reason for putting in these pot stills alongside our Penderyn stills was to obviously to increase capacity, but also to give us different dimensions in terms of creativity, different options. So I think there's certainly a lot that can be done to sort of maybe diversify and be creative. But I'll hand that over to Jan, because as I say, he's got a lot more insight into the future.
Yeah. So Joshua, the answer to that question is one that probably is going to be incomplete this evening. But I guess the idea, just going back to what Laura was saying, the idea of adding the pair of pot stills when they were installed back in 2014 was to give us an opportunity to widen the breadth, I guess, of flavors or mouthfeels we can achieve with our production in our distillery. As you know, our flavor profile is quite unique, very light, very fruity, new make spirit. And Jim Swan, our master distiller at the time, was quite keen for us to sort of allow us to sort of widen the opportunity of what we could do with our maturations. So at the moment we are considering what we can do in terms of developing our range, which will include at some point the inclusion of a double distillation, very likely to be mixed with some of the distillation from the Faraday stills. But then there'll also be expressions where the two will be quite distinct. So the whole idea behind it was really to give us a sort of a much wider armory, if you want, with which to produce a wide range of sort of products, but still with that Penderyn style at its heart. So we're not going to sort of change style simply because we got a pair of traditional pot stills. Those are going to complement what is typically Penderyn in due course, and things will be revealed as and when the time is right. But we are releasing slowly but surely some single casks from double distillation, special bottlings, and the rest will become clear as time goes on.
So, you know, the time now is 5:58 p.m. in California, and I'm feeling all right. So let's try to reveal a couple of things, because I have a follow-up question to that, if you will. Surely, because they were built in 2014, you've done quite a bit of extensive blending between the two stills, the distillates of the two stills. At what point in time, or at what percentage of pot still versus Faraday still do you lose that Penderyn signature finish that I see on all of your whiskeys? Because Penderyn's kind of unique in the fact that you could try 100 whiskeys and you can tell the two Penderyns that are in it simply by the finish of the whiskey. So at what percentage of pot versus Faraday does that signature finally diminish to the point where it's no longer noticeable?
That's an exceptionally good question, Chris. And at this stage, I think I don't have an exceptionally good answer to match it. We certainly asked our blenders, has done plenty of experiments, and losing completely the Penderyn style. If there's some Penderyn spirit in there, it might well happen. It might be hard to detect, but I haven't got a number I can give you. I expect you need to obviously have a majority of double distilled spirit within your whiskey to achieve that result. But again, Laura is more the. I'll pass it back to Laura now because she's more the nose and the palate that in the team than I am. So maybe you got a view, Laura, and that could satisfy Chris with his probing question.
Yeah, sure. So I think that would probably depend on the expression as well, because don't forget I think probably with maybe with a peated expression, you could probably get away with a higher, proportionately higher, perhaps Faraday, pot still spirit than you could with Faraday spirit, because the peat would mask a bit more. Whereas perhaps with something more like a Madeira finish, perhaps you'd have to be a bit more careful with that. I think as Jan was saying, we don't have a number yet, but once you start sort of getting, the more pot still spirit that you put in, obviously the more you will diminish the Penderyn still spirits quality and profile. But I think, as you said, it's just very distinct. The Faraday still spirit is very distinct. It's very recognizable. And one of the things that shines through is that even when you put quite a lot of, for example, Madeira influence in that, or port influence, it's still instantly recognizable. So I don't think we're in danger of, losing the instant sort of that's Penderyn. I think that will always be there. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Jen, but I think we would never want to get to a situation where people don't know that it's Penderyn as soon as they pick it up.
Oh no, it was stated on the label for sure.
Yeah.
No, thanks to you both. It's like the way I vision it in my head is like a tether ball with a very long string to it, where you can just you can hit it all the way around, but you know what it's attached to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's I think it's exciting.
Yeah, one of the really great things with our new make spirit as well is that if you pick up our new make spirit, you can, maybe because it's what I do, but if you pick up that new make spirit and then you go through each of our whiskies, you can always anchor it back to the new make spirit. You always know instantly that that's Penderyn, because you always get that new make spirit sort of element to it, the character, and I think that's really important. So we wouldn't ever want to lose that.
Yeah, Tal, you boys at Milk and Honey have the exact same thing, but it's a little bit different. The in my nights, like I do ABs with all. This is the worst nerdy thing probably anyone's ever said on one of these, but I'll do ABs with different Jim Swan distilleries to see where the signature is, to try to figure out the touch points. And the touch points are kind of evident, but they're also very diverse and independent to each other. So you can take like a flight of Milk and Honey, and you know exactly, or flight of M&H, you know exactly which ones those are. It's fun and unique. But Penderyn, I mean, 2 years running, I did it because it was something where I couldn't believe it the first time it happened. So I had to do it again, where I got a friend to make like 50 blind samples, and in it were 2 Penderyns, and they were you could just immediately spot them. And then the most recent Milk and Honey stuff that's been coming out has been the same thing. So it's going a little bananas, whatever you guys are doing in your new world whiskeys. It's great.
I think that first of all, I have a good name for the world whiskey. Let's call it the boys, the Jim Swan boys, and we can do that with Gouden Carolus as well, I think. And so I think, yeah, if you talk about, I'm going back for a second. If you talk about region, of course, Wales has had a long history of distilling. If you talk about Israel, I think the distillation was invented here, but wasn't used for thousands of years. And then we were the first here in the area. So of course, I'll be happy if there was a section of Middle Eastern whiskies, because we'll probably be the only one. I think we're the only country that actually distill here. There's one in Lebanon, I think. But yeah, if we're going back to the style, so for us, what Dr. Jim Swan did is he actually matched the new make to the way we mature our whiskies. So if you do a rapid, fast maturation, you don't have time for more oxidation. If you take 8 or plus years, our whiskeys, we have the casks and the liquid are fighting for 3 years, 4 years. So we need a thicker new make. So our new make is very fruity, but and a bit oily. We cut very high, between 80% and 70%. The heart is very short and very high. And the 2-line arms of the pot stills are 45 degrees down. That means there's almost no reflux. That means you get some oiliness and fruitiness that really comes out, as Chris said, in the tasting. You get really the same new make. Sometimes, usually in bourbon casks, in ex-bourbon casks, you get the new make through all the maturation period. And I think I can, if I'm getting back to Laura, when you use different kind of stills or different kind of new make for different kind of casks. So when we do peated barley, we tend to use a longer, a bit more of the tails, a longer heart, because there's more essential oils that we need in the peated barley, that we're going to lose them if we do the same cut. And again, if you talk about our style, it starts with the new make, and then it's we tend to, let's say, to hold our climate, just not to let it overwhelm the style, overwhelm the whiskeys. So we try to do more balanced whiskeys in our core range, because if you let the cask, let an STR cask just for 3 years, it's going to be very dominant. So it's great for all kind of expression. It's great for single cask, but our core range is very balanced, and this is our style. And Tomer, the head distiller, this is his style. Like to fit everything inside, but still to keep kind of a balanced and easy to drink whiskeys.
Yeah, quick question here. You're talking about production, so I'll get to that, and then I know Bobby has a question too, so I want to get to his question. Ken wanted to know what the Angel share was at Milk and Honey.
So in the main warehouse in Tel Aviv, it's around 11% a year, something like that. It's just the differences between summer and winter, between very dry season and very humid season, like in the summer. So the whole thing just, really let the Jewish angels are very thirsty.
Baruch Hashem. All right. Bobby, you had a question.
Yeah. Wow. 11%. That's nuts. It's interesting to get two separate people in the room that are kind of, or three rather, that represent these, I guess, new arid distilleries. You're killing it, by the way. I mean, you're making great stuff. I'm a huge fan, but you're kind of the flagship for what will be, Scotland has its 100 to 1,000 distilleries or whatever. America has its, excessive distilleries. You're kind of the first run. Is that, I don't want to use the word intimidating, but you have to hold that. You have to, Penderyn may be the flavor, Milk and Honey may be, when people think Scotch whiskey, some say, unfortunately, they think peated whiskey. That's the flavor. Obviously, there's more. But is that what you are? Are you the flagship? Are you the idea and the cadence, I guess, what the world will see when more obviously pop up in Israel or more pop up in Wales or wherever that may be?
That's a good question. Yeah, you only have one chance to make a first impression, and you're it. So are you setting that? That's a great question.
So I think from our side, yes. We tend to grow with ourselves. So we don't plan that much ahead. I had this conversation with Johnny this week about something else, and we do everything very fast. As I say, we had 4 elections in 2 years, so we are doing everything very fast. So I think that we grew into our style because we were still waiting for the liquid to get above 3 years, because there was no regulations in Israel back then when we started, because no one actually made whiskey. So we just waited for the whiskeys to be 3 years and then started to think what is the style, because unfortunately for us, Dr. James Swan passed away before we had 3 years of whiskey in the casks. So we did it by ourselves, by learning every step. But I think that now we are the biggest. There are two other distilleries now in Israel that getting older now. One of them is in the Golan Heights, and the other one is next to Jerusalem somewhere. But they have younger spirits, different kind of style. I think eventually when we grow, it's going to be probably we go there for the same style, using a lot of, let's say, wine casks or different types of casks. It's kind of hard to see what the connection will be between the distilleries, but it's really, as you say, it's to be a pioneer. It's frightening, but it's very exciting.
Yeah.
As an outsider looking in, I have a comment on that, because again, this is from a whiskey enthusiast point of view. It's kind of like the most exciting thing I see about the entire category, and especially what you guys have done in particular, and what Gouden Carolus has done, and like what a lot of American malt whiskey distilleries have done. But if we just remove the American malt whiskey distilleries from a second, and we take an American's point of view on the world whiskey category, the only thing that I see that still ties it to Scotch whiskey is the fact that a lot of them are doing malt, and a lot of them are doing a minimum of 3 years old. Outside of that, it is completely, there is a whole divergence that is not even, like when people say, like Joshua, you said it, where it's like that Welsh Scotch or that Israeli Scotch. From a flavor standpoint, they're not. It's not even close anymore. Like if you take a look at a lot of what the world whiskeys are doing, Gouden Carolus, it just doesn't taste like Scotch. Penderyn doesn't taste like Scotch. M&H doesn't taste like Scotch, and it's kind of like the coolest thing about it is that it's just that expansion of what malt whiskey can be, and like kind of the future of it, while at the same time not stepping on, like, it's not a copy, right? It's just it's a brave new world of it. I don't know. I think it's like, does it make sense?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I'm just want to answer Kenneth. It's not hot and dry and cold and wet. It's hot and humid, cold and dry. We're next to the Mediterranean, so it's the other way around. I mean, you lose more ABV during the summer, and you lose more water during the winter. So sometimes we fill the casks at 64.5, and sometimes we get up to 60, almost 68.
Wow. Okay. I want to throw that same question that Bobby had to Laura and John about being a pioneer in Wales, and I think you may find yourselves in a slightly different position simply because you have a type of still that no one else is going to have. So in a way, you're a pioneer, but I wonder if you'll always be the first in the modern idea of the sense of the word, but always a bit of a standalone because of the style of whiskey that comes off your stills, or style of spirit.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think, as you said there, Joshua, we don't want people to copy our stills. So this lovely unique style of spirit that we've got is wonderful, but perhaps not. Let's not make that Welsh whiskey. That's our Welsh whiskey. I think what's more important is that we set the standard. And I think I'm really grateful that we can set the standard. We've set quite a high standard, I think, and Welsh whiskey now hopefully will be judged on that standard. That's something to uphold, and obviously that we can uphold ourselves to. But that other incoming Welsh whiskey should strive for as well. So I think it's not necessarily about setting a style, but setting the standard. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Style, a standard rather than style. That's great. Yeah.
So I have a question that actually spins pretty well into talked about the Welsh standard, and for Penderyn and M&H, you guys are basically, you know, where the category, the region is sort of starting from, really, as far as being sort of unique, being sort of trailblazers, modern trailblazers at least, in what you're doing. What do you think should be the defining? What should define what Welsh whiskey is? What should define what Israeli whiskey is? Chris, I mean, if you want to talk about Japanese whiskey, nobody knows what's going to define that. But I mean, like, what to you, what do you think the defining factors of what that whiskey should be? And obviously, there's no right answer, I guess. But to you, what is Welsh whiskey to you? What is Israeli whiskey to you? Chris, what is Japanese whiskey to anybody?
So on the Japanese side, they, you know, again, I'm not Japanese. I don't have a distillery in Japan. So it kind of, you know, I have to speak as again, as a whiskey enthusiast, but what I hope will happen is that there's actually an expansion beyond what they're currently talking about. Like the new statement of intent, I think, is shallow as far as the rich distillation heritage of Japan, because you have, like, it's great that they're going to come up with rules for their malt whiskeys. I love that 100%. But I think that they're missing out on an entire other section of family distillers. Like, there's 852 families in Japan distilling that use koji as the base, and they should be able to be allowed to make whiskey in that style as well, simply because it dates to the 1800s in the United States, and it's been done before. And the first Japanese person who ever made whiskey did it using koji. But that's a topic for another day. But as they establish their categories, I hope that once they've started to make a decision, I just think that I would like to see them branch that out and include more families that are involved in distillation for multi-generations and hundreds of years. And what it's going to allow them to do is continuously to expand upon the flavor footprint that they can put onto the whiskey as a whole. But what they've done historically that I think is just absolutely killer, and I think it is the soul of Japanese whiskey, is that it was never based on, that it's historically been based on blending. So you would have, whereas we talk about with Penderyn having a very particular style, and then they branch out from that style, but you can still, you taste Penderyn, and it's very clear and beautiful and obvious. Japanese distilleries historically have done, they've literally done as many different flavor profiles within a single set of stills as they possibly could, because they did it as to blend a final product. So they build it from the front or from the end back in, or from the outside in, where they say, we want a whiskey in a bottle that tastes like this, so we're going to make these components that can be blended to taste like that. And that's kind of that philosophy of distillation. And I think that that's something that has always historically separated them from a lot of other types of distillers or a lot of distilleries in other countries. And I think it's kind of a cool thing. And I hope that continues as well as they continue to establish what is already a beautiful place within the whiskey community.
I know I was picking on Japanese whiskey specifically, Chris, but that's like exactly what I'm getting at. Like we know what the Penderyn, we know what Penderyn is, we know what M&H is, but is there something that the regions should be? And like that's exactly what I would.
Yeah. So it's, you're right. It can be, it's currently wide open, and it's great for that. But as they start to close it down, I just hope they close it down with multiple avenues. Like, don't make it a single lane road. Make it a nice freeway with lots of lanes, so that you can have all size cars traveling on it. Right.
Yeah.
No one's going to say, how can you follow that? Like, Katie's the only one who makes a statement, and everyone's like,
it's true.
I have to go if you want to, Chris. I mean, I think when it comes to Welsh whiskey, when it comes to Welsh whiskey, it's probably much simpler than Japan, I think. Obviously, it's been very simple to define Welsh whiskey until now, just conversationally, because it's only been Penderyn. We had a clear run for about 16 years now with our whiskey, with no competition. That's going to change very, very soon. And there is work afoot at the moment. Penderyn is working with the other distilleries in Wales on a GI to define what is going to be a Welsh whiskey. And also, unlike Japan or Israel, I believe, we have been abiding until very recently to European laws in what makes a single malt whiskey or whiskey. that was transferred into UK law on the 1st of January of this year. So we still abide to those rules and regulations in terms of UK laws. And the definition of what is going to be a Welsh whiskey, of course, will include our type of distillation, our style, and what we do, plus a slightly wider definition that will allow for a wider variety of styles to be produced in Wales.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding that correctly, because your point is a very good one. Brexit has Brexited, and you are no longer part of the European Union, and so the Faraday still and the spirit that comes off of those stills, do they fall within the UK guidelines still?
Laura, correct me here if I'm wrong, but there are no specific regulation in European law or UK law now, outside of Scotland, I should specify.
Okay.
As to the specific, as to the type of specific still you should use, the regulation is more about the kind of grain you should use to make a single malt, the maximum strength of the distillation. So they're more generic kind of parameters than you would find under the Scotch Whisky Association rules. So it's a much looser definition, if you want.
Yeah. I could almost imagine the Scotch Whisky Association not trying to push some of their specific regulations on producers in Wales or England or Ireland, so as to keep the definition of Scotch whiskey that much more separate. That makes good sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And there might be a little bit of pushback from outside Scotland if they tried.
Yeah. And Aaron, now your question to Tal, I want to modify it a little bit, and I hope you don't mind.
I don't mind.
Because thank you. Because when I think about distillation in Israel, and Tal, you bring up a good point. There's two other distilleries. There's the Golani guys, and then the folks at Yerushalmi. However,
which are the same guys.
Oh, that's right. They're the same guys. That's right. But however, I would say your whiskeys stand apart from a flavor profile because they seem to just want to be doing weird and wacky, sometimes experimental things. I don't think because they're trying to be weird or wacky. I think they're finding their way. And I think where they are finding their way, you have found your way and you're going down that path. And so I wonder, have you set that standard? Do you think that they are going to follow suit and create this Israeli whiskey style?
So I'm not sure, as they say, between two Jews, you have 7 opinions. So just think about 3 distilleries. So I'm not sure about that. But they are, the guys in the Golan are in the Golan Heights, they're making really crazy stuff. I think as long as they get, more veteran, they're going to get some more, more balanced whiskeys or more just thinking like straight core range and not. They even made a whiskey out of hummus, chickpeas. So
okay,
yeah, and so they doing really crazy stuff, and it's great. But and the Jerusalem guys are doing only peated spirit.
Right.
But I think that I'm not sure about the style because we have totally different sizes of distilleries, and we have totally different size of production. We are much bigger than all of the rest, but I think if there's one thing you can take is the thinking outside the box, the hectic way of the way of Israeli thinking. Like we use all kinds of different style of casks, and they're using those, and what we did is, create a core range and a house style, and then started to explode with all kinds of ideas and experiments, which eventually became to be good whiskeys. But it started off as, as Tomer says, we never say no to a cask. Let's see what happens with that. If not, we're going to drink it for lunch. But it's something like that. So I think if you take something that is common between the Israel industry, which is growing. By the way, there's one more that has been established now. Some of them are brew distilleries, but it's still not our size. But I think if you take one thing is They're thinking outside the box. I'm not sure about the typical style. It's not like in Wales.
Can I say that I owe you an apology in a way? When I first had M&H, so ImpEx has a very enthusiast salesperson that I won't mention his name now, but he's amazing. And he deserves a raise. We'll talk about him later. Anyway, talking to him locally, and he says, you have to try this Israeli whiskey. And I thought, that sounds amazing. I'm going to jump in. And I got the bottle, and I thought the first thing I failed at my own rule. I judged it, and I said, it's very young. Because I think the one I got was maybe 12 months, something like that. The very first. And I thought, it's very young. I don't know. Let's give it a shot. I was blown away. And I told him right then and there, I keep an eye on this distillery. This should be watched. This is the next one. And I should have invested. I don't even know if it's a thing, but I should be working because I can't stop talking. It's amazing. So I hope with this new advent of world whiskeys, when opening up to these bigger markets and everything, people don't get pigeonholed in that mentality of it must be this or it can't be whiskey. And I'm not that you're not making great whiskey or whatever, but with Scotch whiskey, people are really about age. Your American whiskeys, if it's a bourbon, they want it from Kentucky and they're really scared if it comes from anywhere else. I hope that everybody listening, this is more to them. If you're not grabbing it and trying it, you're failing yourself. You're just letting yourself down because you're missing some amazing stuff. So that's my confession on that piece, but it's bravo. So
we're all ashamed of you.
But I think, Bobby, you bring up a really good point, right? As new producers who aren't Scotch, who aren't Kentucky bourbon, who aren't, Middleton or something like that, what are some of the obstacles that you find yourselves continually hitting to the point where you're hitting your head against the wall? Like, why can't I get it through to these people that it's not X, it's Y? And so what are the obstacles that you find? And maybe Laura or Giancarlo, I'll pass that on to you first.
Shall I start? Or?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I like seeing you guys fight over who's going to start it.
I'll give you a very brief answer, and then I'll let Laura carry on. My best obstacle I had in the last few years was at a show in Italy, where I was standing behind the table, and this guy comes along, tries the whiskey, looks at the bottle, and says, "I can't understand how this can be single malt with no age statement on the bottle." He just couldn't understand how it could be called a single malt whiskey. It had no age statement on the bottle. So that's the kind of obstacle we find in some places in the world. And it goes back to what I was saying early on. People in some places, or depending on their knowledge or awareness of the evolution of the world of whiskies, they will still expect it to say Scotch and with an age statement. Otherwise, it cannot be a single malt whiskey. That's still a very common obstacle depending on where you go. So that's my sort of kind of example, anecdotal example. But then I'll let Laura carry on with the perhaps less anecdotal examples.
I think that one of the obstacles is that as maybe a new producer, somebody has generally always tried what you're doing before, whether that be a cask expression or a different ABV or a different way of blending it. Somebody has generally done that before. And then you get people going, oh, well, I didn't like it when this distillery did that, so I'm not going to like it. Or, I don't like that sort of expression. I don't like that sort of finish. And that can be quite frustrating. And I mean, generally people are quite happy to try whiskey, whether they like it or not, they're quite happy. So we can usually sort of get around that, but it can just be very frustrating when people come with preconceived ideas about what they like or what they don't like. The other thing is that when people, they look at the alcoholic strength on the bottle and say, that's too high for me, or that's too low for me. And actually they take no account of what the spirit style, might be and how that might influence it. Or the fact, as Jan was saying, with no age statement. I don't, I've been at shows where people have said, I'm not going to try it. I only drink 12-year-old Scotch. That's people can have a very closed mind to things like that, and that for me, when I'm at shows or at tastings or at events, that can be one of the biggest obstacles, is getting people to try it. Once they've tried it the first time, they open their mind, and they're quite happy then to open their mind. But it can just be such an obstacle to get people away from what they're used to, or what they think they liked, or what they didn't like in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I can speak to the challenges on the Japanese side from a scalability point. But I should probably do that after Giancarlo went, then Laura went. So we're good here. All right. Yeah. So scalability, right? So you have when you're developing in, like when you're a newer distillery starting out, especially if you're a newer distillery starting out with a smaller budget and in a place that, and trying to establish a category in a global scale that's maybe underserviced. Like Matsui started out with 3 by 1,000 liter pot stills, like Portuguese pot stills. And then they had to operate with those and produce with those and sell. And then they had to reinvest into where they could get a 5,000 liter wash still and a 3,000 liter, Japanese spirit still, Japanese wash still and Japanese spirit still, where they can actually scale their production up. And what that does is it goes back to the age statement thing, but the scalability and age statement all being together, because it's a cash flow issue, right? Like, how do you make sure that you're bringing money in so you can continue to afford production, unless you have some super deep pockets, which a lot of folks, some people do, but some people don't, and afford to continue with production while at the same time bringing money in, while at the same time establishing your brand in a manner that's well respected. And that's I think that's a difficult place to navigate for a lot of folks, but luckily there's been a lot of folks who've done it correctly. But that's something else to kind of deal with, because when we first started selling the Matsui stuff, initially what we got were that same question about age statements, like, I like Yamazaki 12. Well, this is less than 3 years old, so there's no way I'm going to like it. But then once they try it, you're like, oh yeah, they're great. And then like Mizunara this year was ranked in one competition, and the best Japanese whiskeys, number 1 was Yamazaki 25-year-old, which is 10 grand a bottle. Number 2 was Hibiki 30-year-old, which is 5 grand a bottle. Number 3 was Matsui Mizunara, which is $100 a bottle. So we're like, well, in perspective, it's I think it's punching above its weight. But there's a lot of preconceived notions that you have to fight against. But while at the same time managing to pay all your bills and get your production where you need it to be to sustain the demand that you then get by putting out good stuff. So they call that a waltz, I believe.
That's like the shiniest bronze medal in the world. Right? It's okay being third place if you're the only affordable whiskey in the lineup.
Yeah, right?
we did a dinner pairing with that one, and it killed. It did amazing. I'll say something that's interesting to me also is, as far as, not to get off topic, but Japanese whiskeys, they're one of the few in America anyway that fall into that weird allocation thing where they're, the Buffalo has its, hard to find, but then like a Yamazaki 12, it's like you get it, and people are like, how'd you find that? People are paying $400 for a $100 bottle or a $60 bottle. It almost falls into that weird category of unobtainable when and then you think about it, you're like, they're just getting started. You really should be able to get it easier, and maybe it's an import thing that I don't understand. But
well, what's funny about that? What's funny about that is it's actually. It's from both sides. It's frustrating, not just from the consumer side, but from the producer side as well, because you're right, that creates negative emotion on someone who said, I tried to get it, I couldn't get it, and why is there an inflated price for it? Which is it's not what we're selling it for, right? Like we sell it for what it should be sold for. It's just on the secondary is when it gets that increase in price, and us not having it to sell it can be severely frustrating. But also just someone saying, like, just becoming disgruntled with the brand, saying, I had a hard time getting it. I think I'm over it now. I'm going to move on. Or by saying, there's no way I'm going to like it because it's taken, there's no way the hype's going to be as good as the whiskey is. Like, do you see where from both sides, it can be a right pain in the backside. But I can tell you, as far as allocation stuff goes, we've run into that same problem with everybody on this screen. So I think we're all in the same fight. Like Penderyn single casks can be, they can be a right trick to get everyone happy, and some of the M&H stuff too. So
Katie came in with the 13-year. We shut the door and locked it. Penderyn's 13-year. And we were like, how did you find? And other people are going to want to take it from us. So we were like, because it was so hard to find down here.
So you're saying clearly we need to have a talk with that rep on the East Coast about playing favorites.
Yeah, forget about that raise for that guy.
I got him a promotion and inspired in the same.
Tal, what about you for milk and honey? What are the big obstacles that you come up against? Is it what Bobby had said? Is it that, you know, it's 3 years old? It can't be good if it's 3 years old, or are there other things that you have to go up against as well?
First of all, because we were the first from our country. So really, whiskey from Israel? Are you guys even drinking? You're allowed to drink? Really, these are the true questions. I think that our first ever show that we took apart was the London Whiskey Show, I think in 2018. And I think we were not supposed to be there. We didn't have whiskey. But, so we're standing there with all kinds of cask samples and a very young single malt. Someone asked about the cash flow when we started. So we didn't do any natural spirit, only distillation of malted barley. So of course we have our gin, which is based on that. So this was started for the cash flow. And then we just launched all kinds of products called a young single malt. We didn't call it whiskey, except of course in America, which we had to call it whiskey in bloom because of your regulations. But so we are standing there with a 5 months old blend, and I think that we had to go through like a sales pitch with starting from the new make and then all kinds of cask types, and then to the 5 months old, and letting people guess, because they, of course, if they were focused, they saw what was the first distillation and what was the year. So they probably knew that it's not a whiskey, but it was really great. And I think that if there was one sentence I remember from there, it was really only 5 months. But then when we launched our first whiskey, we were just another whiskey in a big show. And of course, it was older than 3 years, and it was much better than the young single malt. But we kind of lost the gimmick. But then again, no age statement, nothing. You're from Israel. You're doing that. You're doing this. Eventually, it was just a taste. I think our big boom was the last London Whiskey Show. I think it was 19 when we had the experiments from the Dead Sea, our warehouse at the Dead Sea. So we called it Med versus Dead, and with the pomegranate wine casks. So this was actually opened people's mind, and they didn't care about the age. They didn't care about where we come from. They just wanted to experiment. I think it was called this room called the Trail of the Cask or something like that. So it was just a step after a step. We are getting a lot of questions about the age, but it's. I think we are making so much buzz and so much noise, like our country, small distillery that makes a lot of noise. So I think that people tend to forget to talk about the age in the last few months and talk more about experiments and about the taste.
So Tal, the example that you were just describing kind of made me think of like a new band that releases, chart top debut album and just like shoot straight to the top. And then the next big question is, well, how do you top that? And how do you still differentiate yourself and meet those standards? So I guess one thing that's on my mind, and, question for all of you, as you are each kind of constantly redefining the standards as some of the, the first pioneers of whiskey making in your countries, how do you balance between staying creative and redefining those standards without going completely off the wall and losing the identity that you're still crafting in that process?
So I think for us, it's like I said before, we actually established our core range with the classic and the elements, and we found another experimentative series we call the ImpEx, and then this is where we're doing the crazy results of too much coffee in the morning or too much cask tasting, like the pomegranate wine cask, or I don't know, the Dead Sea, which we're going to launch this year. If there's going to be something left, it's 25% angel share there. So we'll see. I think that this is it. We are playing with that all the time. We have a core range of casks, which is ex-bourbon, STR, ex-Isla casks, and some Israeli red wine casks, and all the rest is, just go and play. And sherry, of course, and then just go and play. And so we are trying to keep the balance. Of course, core range is what we do. Really, do the same consecutive and consisting. Just try to do every batch the same, and Tomer is really making everyone's life very hard to get the real good casks. And I think the most hard one to do is the red wine cask, because it's not only different from cask to cask, it's different from a grape variety to a grape variety, or from a terroir to a terroir. But this is still the core range and our house style. We get out of our house style, out of the balanced style, out of our mind with the Apex and the small batches.
Yeah, Katie, I couldn't agree more. The first two Kings of Leon albums were awesome. Every album after that, pure steaming garbage. Pure steaming garbage.
No, the pressure gets to you, I guess.
It definitely does.
Hot takes.
It's hard to write a hit with a full belly, man.
That is definitely true. There are some questions that popped up in the comments here, but before we went over to them, I just wanted to reach out to Katie, Bobby, and Aaron to see if you had any questions for the panel.
I don't have any more questions really. I mean, this has been a fantastic slew of information for me personally. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, and I'll let you guys know. I'll let you know as soon as it comes up. I've yet to have anything imported by ImpEx that I don't like, and that's insane. Because I can be harsh when there are things I don't like. I'll let you all know privately. I'll let you all know when you have something that I don't like. But I mean, Bobby talked about it before. How he sort of discounted M&H, and and now he's gung ho about it, and he loves it. Anybody that listens to the podcast knows I'm a borderline evangelist for Penderyn. I love this stuff. I won't shut up about it. And I'm very humbled that you guys have had us on, and I'm very sorry that everybody is so hung up on age statements, because
sorry about that one.
that everybody's so hung up on age statements, because I try, and Bobby tries, and Katie tries, and we try to stop getting hung up on age statements, people. I mean, Bobby and I were in a distillery the other day, and we pulled from a barrel that was, what was it, Bobby? 1 year and 5 months, something like that.
Yeah.
I can't get it out of my head.
The guy, we were working on a project, and the guy there was like, yeah, I got older stuff, and all we wanted to do was taste this young barrel. I think what impressed me the most is, because again, I'm now a follower of M&H. I think they're amazing. I think you guys are killing it. I want more. I want to visit. We have a planned trip out to Wales and Scotland. We hope to swing by and visit. So we ImpEx in general. Aaron hit the nail.
Are we swinging by Israel when we go out to Wales and Scotland?
We're gonna go around.
You didn't know that?
So are they by each other? No. Different trips, man. Aaron can only take one vacation.
We're not really in Europe.
Yeah. Everything ImpEx makes is amazing, but I think one of the things that emotionally impressed me the most was we had Penderyn on the podcast, and Ista specifically. I remember her saying, and she was very, very to the point and very direct about, scientific about everything. But then we kind of asked something along the question of, what's one of the what's something you want to say, to the naysayers? And she just livened up and said, age doesn't matter. Stop caring about, start caring more about what's coming out, what's going in the bottle, what it tastes like, and then move from there. And I think, as new distillers come out, specifically distilleries that are aging in, second fill and third fill or whatever, they don't have that new cask. People get weird about age, but I'm telling you right now, it's good. It's good first. It's good new make off the still. It's good ingredients. It's good malts or whatever grain you're using. It's good barrel choices. Those are the things. And if you believe and buy into the distillery, and you believe and buy into the distributor or the person that's putting it on the shelf, and they're selling it good enough anyway, you're going to get a good product. And that's what you should be looking for, what people buy into. And I'm telling you right now, we buy. So I have no questions, like Aaron said. I'm just grateful to be here and thankful to that you guys are producing awesome stuff. And I can't wait to see more come to me. And Chris, thank you for representing an entire country, by the way. No one said it.
Good job, buddy.
Leave it to the ginger from Georgia to represent Japan.
Cheers to you, buddy.
I try.
We got a question that came in, and Sam, I'm gonna punt this question to you if you don't mind. Tobarino Hendricks suggested that ImpEx needs an Armagnac in the portfolio. I think that's what he said there. So no, he says no.
No Armagnac. So we started as a Scotch whiskey importer, blended whiskeys, single malt whiskeys, and then we extended to world whiskey. And now we're with gins and we're with rums. So let's just take it easy because we already have 16 different brands coming in. No, mezcal, yeah, Mal de Amor, that's another one. Sorry, thanks, Chris. I just wanted to kind of echo Bobby's question and how Laura answered it in terms of being the pioneer and being someone who sets very high standards, and it's very difficult to achieve that kind of standards of quality and taste. But I think it's not less difficult to be there. With that said, I have a question to you, Tal, and to both of you, Laura and Giancarlo. Joshua, I hope you don't mind me I know you keep this cat in the bag.
Oh, no.
But we have, Chris and I have a pretty big passion project where we ask both distilleries to, make some casks available for this project, where we put our name on the bottle. And of course, we were expecting, creme de la creme out of this. And you were kind enough to not only, make those casks available for us, but offer the creme de la creme. What is your criteria of how you select these casks? Because honestly, it's very, very difficult for us to select. Like we had 3 or 4 samples from Penderyn, and I couldn't sleep the whole night because I loved so much both. And of course, you said no when I said, can we have both? But what's the criteria? And the same thing for you, Tal. I know that you tried and you never disappoint, but I know that this cask has a special place in your heart. So please.
Shall I start, I guess? But that was the criteria, I guess. In terms of the quality of the whiskey in the cask, ultimately, Eista, our master blender, is the custodian of quality and decides what is going to be special and treasured, and whether we should allocate it to our best customers and our best markets or not. But apart from Eista's judgment, I guess it comes down also to the rarity of the cask. We, over the years, we invested, and we still do invest a lot of time and resources to source the best and most interesting cask we can get hold of. Laura and I had been on a working holiday together to Madeira, seeking casks in the past to support our house style, the Madeira Finnish house style, and that's yielded results over the years. Very often we don't get a large volume of these casks; they're very few and far between. And that's what makes them a little bit more special, apart from the exceptional quality of the whiskey, is the rarity of the cask. And for us, it's fantastic to be able to work directly with the producers of many of these casks, not with the cask brokers, and be able to bring a bit more to the story of the whiskey, as well as the Penderyn story, also the story of the producer of the wine or the rum or the wine from Italy that was involved in the previous life of the cask. So that, and then for us, we can close essentially the whole story from the beginning to the end, from where almost the cask was made all the way to the bottle that reaches yourself in the US. So those are the kind of perhaps obvious criteria, but that's the way I guess it works. It works for us. Then there's probably also a little bit of a magic that Aista applies to when she selects the spirit she puts in the cask for maturation or in certain casks. So a range of the different things. I hope that makes sense.
So from our side, it's we still don't have the whole range of cask we wanna interest you, because we start with looking at the Excel table and looking at what is about to be 3 years, and then we decide on a style or a few tastes, and then we do our own blind tasting. But usually it's Tomer and myself, or with Johnny, with another guy, and just doing that, and and then we send it to you. But usually you just you count on us. But I guess it's we still don't have a 3-year-old single sherry cask, because we started the whole seasoning project. We had a few, but we started the whole seasoning project less than 3 years ago. We have our own seasoning project in Jerez because we need to make kosher wines. So we have PX and Oloroso. But I think that eventually we're going to have so much more to offer you that is out of the core range. Not only bourbon cask and STRs, but we are going to have some beautiful, some of the crazy casks. Of course, we need to get it through Dana, the marketing VP, because she wants those things to be ImpEx, and we want to give our partners some single casks. So it's always, the fight between the branding, positioning, and the guys that really wants a drum and to sell something good. So I think next year, Sam, you're going to have much more types of casks to choose, but we are getting there step by step.
Thank you, Tal. We're very happy with all the casks that we brought in were huge success. But the one with the PX finish is very special. And for Penderyn, we had some samples of 6 years old, even 4 years old, and all the way to 15 years old. And guess which one we selected? Yes, the 4 years old. So speaking of age and how important this 4 years old was out of this world. So again, thank you, Penderyn team, for making it available for us.
If I may add a comment about age statements, my personal favorite comment is that age statement is a very blunt tool. It doesn't really allow you to sort of assess a whiskey. It's a blunt tool to bottle very large volumes of whiskey to ensure that you get a consistent quality. But I think it is bringing back, I guess, connecting with the beginning of this evening's conversation. No age statement. It's what really most whiskies from the new world of whiskey have got in common. That's what defines many of them, because most of us are sort of craft. I guess we are growing a little bit out of craft, but they are sort of distillers that can pay attention to every step of the process, select every single cask. And so we know that every single cask is going to go in the bottle is going to be the best quality, as well as every step that comes before that. And that's why age is a blunt tool, as I said earlier. And I guess that's my view on it.
I think you're right, and I think it's one of the greatest things about the world whiskey movement, about the new malt whiskey movement, I guess, with both domestic for us and international distillers, is that if anything, it's been proven that age is almost irrelevant, right? Because with using smaller casks with different latitude lines of different elevations of maturation, different latitude lines of maturation, we've seen that the whole idea of aging has just been thrown out the window. We keep trying to, and I'm just as guilty as everybody else. Bobby, I am the same as you, man. Like, I've definitely picked up bottles and said, there's no way, and then had to sit there and with my tail between my legs and head ducked and had to go apologize to folks. Where it's everyone's doing their own thing, and everyone's doing their own thing their own way and creating their own style. And if my one big takeaway from all of it is that, and even in Scotch, it's no longer relevant. It is a case by case basis based on what the generational distiller is trying to produce, and what they're putting in the bottle. And it is a very blunt tool indeed.
Age doesn't matter. Let's talk about this 17 years old Japanese whiskey.
Yeah. It's a good age. We have some 17-year-old we have some 17-year-old casks that are being bottled right now as well, and they are pretty flippin' delicious. But
look at him backpedal. That's beautiful.
I know.
They're great. I mean, but we have some 10-year-old stuff, and with Fukano, I've blended some 4-year-old stuff with some 12-year-old stuff just because it worked, right? Like, if anything, I would ask, like, so I am also a huge fan of Penderyn and have been. And like with Laura, the question I would ask you is, because you guys are kind of one of the pioneers. You were founded really at the cusp of when all this was kind of beginning. Like you have enough age at the distillery where you've kind of made the trail that a lot of other folks have been able to walk a little bit easier, simply because you had to walk it alone for a while with just a few other entities. In your tenure as being a pioneer in the expansion, and simply because of your proximity to Scotland, so because you're so close but not part of it, and having to, that's Travis is a little bit of the booze and the translucent skin, let me tell you. What has been your greatest I mean, like kind of like, not what has been the coolest thing that you've seen happen during your tender, like from the initial steps that you took in trying to get this brand built into where it is? Like, share some of that with us. Like the one thing where, like, with endurance, I guess the question is about endurance. Like when you feel, because it's always a grind, it never stops being a grind. When you feel that weight coming back down of having to continuously perform on the sophomore and on the third album and everything, when you feel that weight come down, what is the thing you refer back to that lets you know, like, I got this, no worries, and it keeps it fresh for you?
I think by the time I joined the company in 2012, the company had already been going for quite a few years, and so the really hard work had been done before I got there, thankfully. But I was really fortunate to join the company just on the cusp where things were turning. My first couple of years at the company, we were producing around 90,000 LPA per year, and by the time I'd been with the company, I think probably 3 or 4 years, we were producing 4 times as much. And that kind of, sometimes I walk into the distillery and I think back to how the distillery used to look when I first got there. And Jan, you'll agree with me on this. It used to look a bit like somebody's sheds. It was a bit basic. It was a bit small, but producing some really great stuff. But now when I walk in and I see the kit that we've got, it's so much bigger. It's so much, we're just producing stuff on such a massive scale compared to what we were, a few years ago. Going to the warehouse, and I remember when I first joined the company, and Aisha and I used to meet with Dr. Swan every month. And every month we used to sit down and we used to sit at the table, and we used to have such a small number of samples on the table that we had to go through. And it would sort of be a scrabble to try and put a batch together, because we didn't have that much whiskey at that time, and then from that whiskey, from those samples, you have to choose the whiskey that's, firstly of age, and then is to the standard and is going to blend properly. So your samples, your pool is getting smaller and smaller every time. And now I speak to Aisha when it comes to blending and bottling time, and she's like, yeah, I've got this. And And just seeing that and having that conversation with Oyster, where we've got so much more whiskey available. We've got so much, not just in volume, but in terms of the whiskey that's coming through so quickly, so so readily, and it's picking up the flavor so readily compared to what it was maybe 10 years ago. And I know that Oyster feels the same about this. We always sort of say to each other, look how far we've come, and that for us is a really big step.
Thank you for that. And I would think that Sam would agree with me. When we have our conversation, we say that exact same thing sometimes. It's like, look how far we've come. It's a fun thing. Yeah, that's well put. Thanks. Anyone else want to contribute? That question's kind of an open question for all of us who've been doing this for a long time. You guys at Cask Chasers, what have you, like, as with the evolution of your podcast, like, what keeps you going?
I don't know.
Yeah.
my wife's next to me. She goes, booze.
Well, Chris, people send us free alcohol.
Open-ended question. Very simple answer.
It's. I'll be honest with you. There's no one, and I've worked in different industries, and I'm not going to speak for Katie and Aaron, but we've worked in different industries. I've from the military to sales to all kinds of different aspects of life. There's no industry like the whiskey industry, and I mean that with all my heart. It is the most caring, inclusive, invested. Everybody has each other. There's so much competition, you wouldn't know it because everybody has each other's back. It's a very I mean, the fact that I'm on a call right now, with all of you is wild. It's just that kind of passion, and it's an art. It's an art form, and it's in some ways an untainted yet art form that I appreciate and love. I like the idea simplicity. I like the idea that you have a group of people who just go to work. I keep calling out Ista. I think somebody in the distillery called her the Jimi Hendrix of it was like watching Jimi Hendrix.
That was Chris.
That was me.
Yeah. And I said that to her. I said, I think I called, yeah. And she said, I don't know what you mean by that. I just go to work and do my job. To not even realize that you're creating something and then to sit there for 3 years or 2 years or whatever it may be and cross your fingers and go, well, let's hope we made something good. Mind blowing. That's why we have a platform. That's why we created a show. That's why we have the followers and listeners, because people see that and they want to be baptized in it. They want to be a part of it. They want to watch the growth and change. And Chris, you said it from not too long ago. We're at the beginning of this. I mean, it's not old. Whiskey's old, but this new movement of whiskey isn't old. Mid 80s, maybe, if you can trace it back to this new movement and maybe early 2000s, if you want to come to this actual movement. It's new and it's exciting, and I think it's something fun to watch, and I'm just super excited to be a part of it. And that's the alcohol part. So,
but well said.
I can relate to that, guys. We always say, that we need to be careful not to fall in love too much with what we're doing, because it's really fun to work in the whiskey industry. And we always gonna think we're the best. Yeah, look at that and chase this and taste that. But we are really, you want to stay, with your feet on the ground. And then if you're, as like Laura said, look at where we come. And so for us, we are so young, and we just did the launching in the worst year in the world, I think, since the Second World War, something like that. It was a great year for launching of the first whiskey. But then we started this year with recognition from the industry. As Bobby said, the industry is kind of really watching each other's back. So we won a Craft Producer of the Year at the World Whiskey Icons of Whiskey. We didn't submit ourselves, so we didn't know about that. And then some other prizes with something that it's on its way to America, one of the apexes. And it's amazing for us. I remember that we started to send all kinds of whiskeys to competitions, and we got silver, we got bronze, and Tomer always said, if you get the bronze or the silver, it's going into the toilets at the production site. It's there, it's on the wall there. Only the gold or double golds you put on the visitor center, and eventually we have some stuff to put at the visitor center. So it is great. We just wake up in the morning, getting straight back to work, tasting and selling and doing that, and you need to stop from time to time, just have a little a drum and say we did something great.
I real quick, I want to hand it off real quickly to Katie. Katie was our she started as just sort of a member of our Cask Chasers group. We met her at like a party / tasting we were having at Bobby's house. They were like living in the same town, and I've just seen Katie grow so much from somebody sort of dabbling to an enthusiast to someone who is now our director on our podcast and borderline an authority on the subject of whiskey. And what has it been like for you to take over what Joshua is doing right now? What has it been like for you, Katie, just as far as, sort of this evolution, what you've seen from ImpEx, what you've seen in the industry, from sort of a consumer to your evolution and all that?
First of all, darn you, Aaron, because I was going to throw it to you next, but that's fine. No, thanks. Thank you for the kind words. And I just want to say, to kind of echo what Bobby and Aaron were saying earlier, it's so wonderful to be on this call with you guys. And just to think that we can talk through about, something that we love together in such depth is mind blowing to me. I think one of the things that I've seen, which is something I hope to say, especially in joining the podcast in this capacity, when I first started dabbling in whiskey, I really felt like I was barely scratching the surface. And I think at the time I was experiencing it with some people who were, strictly consumers, but I think more along the mindset of some of the folks we were mentioning earlier, the opinions where, well, what's the age statement? What are kind of the standard ways that we're used to grading whiskey? And that was kind of the end of the conversation. And the thing that I've enjoyed seeing the most, and, I think we've tied this into the show itself as a pillar of what we're trying to do, is just to keep exploring all of the different aspects that you look at the industry, you can look at the spirits themselves, how they're made, the history behind them, the culture of what goes into making them, the complications of how you actually get into market. There are just so many different fun ways to look at what we do and what we enjoy and then share it back with the broader audience. That's something that I've really enjoyed and I think keeps us going, because the worst thing that can happen, in my opinion, is, we go through another stalemate with whiskey, and we start thinking about it as like your grandfather's drink and there's nothing much more special to go about it. And we lose the creativity that it was kind of founded on. So that's been my favorite.
Yeah. So listen, everybody, we're about 7 minutes over already. However, there's still a
world peace.
We have to get to the world peace part of the segment. And then I already bought a Coexist bumper sticker, so we're halfway there, which is great. But if you had just a few more minutes, and I'm looking at you, Tal, and especially Tal, because it's 1 billion o'clock next week in Israel right now. But Laura and John, if you guys are okay for another 5 to 6 minutes, Katie sent me a question that she said, hey, if we have time, I'd love to ask this. And we were ending the previous conversation kind of talking about, and it was what Bobby had said, right? Where it's being a part of this whiskey community. You'd never know that people are in competition because we're all there helping one another. And so with that idea of community in mind, Katie, I wonder if you wouldn't mind posing the question that you had, because I thought it was a brilliant one.
Yeah, sure. So as we've been talking tonight, one of the things I was kind of picking up on is that it seems like a lot of the single malt movement, or at least, a piece of this, is kind of influenced by logistics and the fact that right now there aren't a whole lot of regional distilleries that would support something like blending. So I was just kind of curious from, a future looking or philosophical standpoint, as that starts to change and more distilleries start following the trail that you guys are blazing, do you think that's going to become part of your distillery's vision to experiment more with blending and kind of get into something like that? Or do you think it's going to be continuing with the single malt as really a truly unique expression of kind of your character and what you were founded on?
So if I can answer, we're still in a stage that I cannot tell you that we didn't think about that, it's usually Tomer and I just, again, when we had one too many or something like that, but it's we were thinking about that, but we still need to establish our brand in the single malt whiskey distillery and then maybe think about that. But again, we don't have enough distilleries in Israel that are going to make, and I'm not trusting what they're doing right now. Maybe in a few years they're going to make. We are all for that. We want to have a whiskey industry in Israel that, if you look at Israeli whiskeys, and you can say it's a good thing. If you taste something that it's not good, you're going to think that I'm doing wrong too. So we want the whole industry to build, and then we might think about that. But it's still premature right now.
So yeah, Katie, very good question. I think the short answer would be yes, but I'll put a bit more meat on the bones to that answer. I think there is a generally, depending on the level of knowledge, I guess, of the consumer, a bit of a misconception that non-single malt whiskies are not as good a quality, which, and we all know that you get some amazing blends, some amazing single grain whiskies. You get the whole plethora of types of whiskies that are of exceptional quality. So that's probably the first misconception to bat away out of the conversation. And then the other part of our answer is that I think, as I mentioned earlier, we got a distillery that is about to start, another distillery that is about to produce alcohol in North Wales later on this month. So we got two distilleries under the Penderyn name with slightly different kind of descriptions, producing at different sites. Next year, we have 3 distilleries producing whiskey at 3 different sites. So obviously, we can decide to bottle from each distillery independently as single malts. But I'm sure that, no doubt, at some point we'll create some blends out of the 3 distilleries, and we don't necessarily see that being an issue. And we kind of, I think we welcome it as another opportunity to broaden the range of products we can offer out of the Penderyn portfolio. So hopefully that was an answer you were kind of hoping for.
Yeah, I like toying with questions like that because there are so many unknowns to it, and so many different factors. So it's fun just to kind of see where your guys' heads are at with that and the openness to the future that lies ahead of you.
Yeah, as I said, it's another opportunity to experiment, to create something different. We know that in the second distillery about to open North Wales, we're going to focus on peated distillations, which we don't do at all at Penderyn at the moment. In the third distillery, we don't exactly know what we'll do yet. It could be quite an experimental distillery. We might not be using malt, still to be decided. So we are very much for experimentation and keep on innovating while still remaining loyal to what the true Penderyn style with our Madeira house style finish, but just complementing that with more hopefully exciting expressions.
Nice.
Beautiful.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts.
Can I ask you a question real quick?
You got it. This will be the final one. So do it to it. Make it yours.
This
is to who? Oh, me. All right.
The IB portion of this, of distillers like them who are creating these unique bottlings, and if we think about or expressions, we think about single cask nation. What does it look like to select? And when you're looking for different things to produce or to pull in, you're looking for unique. They are forced to be unique and different. Does that intrigue you?
Does that intrigue me that they're forced to be different?
Well, they kind of are, and to look forward to that maybe unique bottling from that IB point of view or the independent bottling point of view, a lot of cool new stuff's going to come from what they're producing later down the road. This is a futuresque question. Do you see being part of that?
Do I see IBs being a part of that? I most definitely do, because I think that's been the part that independent bottling has played over the past couple of 100 years, to discover these distilleries that really, if we look at the Scotch whiskey industry, it wasn't until the 50s or 60s that the Glenlivet even had their own brand. You would get that through independent bottlings, or it was, put in some sort of a blend. And so from the perspective of an independent bottler, it's incredibly exciting to be lucky enough to have access and connections and partnerships with distilleries like Penderyn, with Milk and Honey and so on. Because, and this is a very personal perspective, yes, I'm thinking of bottling whiskey from these distilleries from a business perspective. Of course, right? I have to feed my children, but really, I'm a whiskey dork through and through, and I like playing the part of the evangelist. And what I love about independent bottlers is they highlight where that whiskey is coming from. It's a very important point to say, this is where that whiskey was made, because that is how whiskey is discovered. That's how distilleries are discovered. And I can understand apprehension from some distilleries who might say, well, I want, we have our 10-year-old, 12-year-old, 25-year-old, or what have you, and this is how we want to be known. But in a way, it's the job of the independent bottler to say, okay, if you do know Penderyn, or you do know Milk and Honey, or you do know Lafroig, here's a slightly different side to this distillery that right? So you get to wear two different hats, one that can introduce you to a distillery, you as a consumer, or one that can introduce you to a different side of a distillery that you may not know. And that, as an independent bottler, is a really exciting thing. And again, it ties back to I'm an independent bottler because I'm a whiskey dork first and foremost, right? I got into it because of my love for it and me wanting to preach from the mountaintops about these distilleries. So. Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. Thank you. And Tal, John, Laura, it's so late for you all. Hopefully I know Tal's probably just going to pour some more coffee and be on with his day.
Jogging.
That's jogging. There you go. Jogging. But thank you all. Sam, Chris, I know it's a bit earlier for you. Katie, Aaron, Bobby. It's all getting late for you. We're about to all turn into pumpkins, but I want to thank you all for being a part of this. And Chris and Sam, your questions were really welcome. Chris, what I love about you is you think so far outside of the box, yet it all makes sense and you all tie it back. It's that tetherball you talked about before. You don't know where it's coming from, but there's a connection somewhere. And I really like that, and I appreciate your insight.
Oh, shucks. Guys, I want to take the opportunity. First of all, Johnny knows that the second we don't need isolation in the UK. I'm coming to Penderyn. Just missed flights, but so you're welcome. Everyone is welcome here. Everything is open here, and especially I want to see Chris' color at the Dead Sea. I think if we talk about experiments, this is going to be an experiment to see him here in the summer. So you're welcome, guys, and thank you so much for this evening.
I've already gone through 4 bottles of sunblock this year.
Oh my gosh! And Katie, Bobby, and Aaron, thank you 3 so much. We really appreciate you being a part of it, bringing your insight and your questions. And to the viewers, in 2 weeks, we're coming back, and we're really going to put it hard to Chris here, because we're going to be talking about Japanese whiskeys from Japan, Japanese koji whiskeys, and so on. So you're in the hot seat, Chris.
Yeah, let him have it.
And that's May 19, and then June 2nd, that will be our final one, and we'll be focusing on independent bottlers. So that'll be good fun. And Chris and Sam, you'll be there for both events, and so excited to have you all back. And that's it. Good night, everybody. Thank you all so much.
Bye, guys. Good night. Thank you.
Cheers. Good night.
Thanks so much, everybody.